I think it is 5:15, so I'm calling the Library Board of Trustees to order. And I will say that my name is Diana Blake, and I will have James start. Introduce yourself so the audience knows who you are.
Yeah, my name is James Perry.
Hi, I'm Erin Jones.
Mike Shearer.
I'm Ross Helgevold.
Elaine Main.
Sarah Meyer Ryerson.
I'm Denny Stufflebeam.
Okay, everybody, let's get to business here, and do I hear a motion to adopt the agenda?
I have a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, let's take a look at the minutes, and they were well done as usual. We might want to keep an eye on minutes here
We'll do that.
until Andrew gets here.
Yep, we'll do that.
Okay, I don't think I saw anything here that I questioned. How about anyone else? If not, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes for October?
So move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Let's get right down to the financials.
Okay. We can look over the checks list first if you like. We have a checks list from October, and there were a couple of charges there related to the 20th building anniversary celebration. The item to Eckers that's about a quarter of the way down the list. There was another Hy-Vee food supplies a few below that those were actually for the focus groups that we had for our planning focus groups. The check for $4,300 to Kimberly Bolin and Associates was payment number 3, actually. So the only part remaining that we have to pay our consultants is the last 25%, which they will get after they present their report to the board, whenever that ends up being, if it's December or January. I think when they are on site at that same time, they will also have a meeting with the staff, the first kind of work meeting, where they'll give us some guidance in starting to flesh out the details of the report. So it would be after that point that the final payment would be paid. You'll notice 2 payments to Marco. That's the company that we lease our copy machine from. And the $248, I believe, is the lease amount monthly. Yep. And the $217 is, depending on what's going on at the moment, we are making a lot more of our copies in-house now, say for flyers for different things or big events. So we pay per copy at the same rate that we have under contract with them. And I just talked to the sales representative today, and we'll watch that closely to find out when it's advantageous for us to move to a different copy level. But right now we're where we should be at, and it actually is more efficient per copy for us to copy with that machine than it is with our smaller color printers.
Why do we have a $10.76 bill to CenturyLink?
I asked the same question because a few months back, several months back maybe, was when we switched our phone service over to Waverly Utilities, and we were still, as part of the city group, we were still under contract with CenturyLink, but the timing was right for us because we also wanted internet service with Waverly Utilities. So Denny checked on that for me, and the city said that this should be the last month that we see our portion of the basic telephone service on our bill.
Okay.
So
And it seemed to me that the very bottom one, that Wood River Energy, $65, that seems quite reasonable for, that's our gas.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, Shane, our building supervisor, I know there had been a couple of times where the boiler was off. The boiler is really the main thing that takes gas. And so it may be particularly low because of the boiler being off.
Well, we had work done on it. Is it more efficient now, maybe?
That I don't know. I'd have to check with him.
Sir,
The-
item 6522, New York Times, is $34.40 for a year, or is that less than that?
That we had gone to a monthly billing with them, which actually worked pretty slick. They would put it on our credit card, on the city's credit card billed to the library, and that, we moved it off our jobber for our periodicals because we kept having this happen where about the time that subscriptions, it was time to renew, we'd be missing a couple, which was a big annoyance because it's really hard to fill those in. But I don't think the finance department, I think the finance department would like it better if we paid it in different intervals rather than every month.
So this is the monthly.
Yeah, so Denny's been working on getting that moved over to once a year.
Yeah, in fact, I talked to New York Times again today, and it would be, I guess, more efficient for us. I checked to see how it would compare with some times when they haven't had a year subscription, and this was even a few dollars lower.
I was hoping it was annual, because then could afford to take it myself.
I think it's more expensive, isn't it?
Times 12, Mike.
Times
Yeah,
12,
times,
yeah.
oh, wow.
All right.
So the miscellaneous contract to the State Library of Iowa for cataloging. So I got to get this through my brain. We pay one group for the catalog numbers, and then another group for the explanation of the book and that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, that's true. There is content that is the
Yeah.
extra things related to the book, the book jacket images and the reviews and things like that. That is through our ILS Circe Dynex that provides that through our catalog. The actual cataloging description, the MARC record, we purchase those. It's an OCLC purchase that's bought down. The price is bought down per record by the state library. So every year we have to estimate how many OCLC records are we going to use. And then if we use at least that many, we get that price, we get that contract price. So there was an effort a couple of years ago by the state library to encourage libraries to spend a little bit of money on some quality records, and it's all about if you ever combine your catalog with someone else, you want those records to mesh up well. And truthfully, there just aren't a whole lot of items anymore that we do original cataloging for because it's so easy to copy catalog is what they call it. So we're getting good records there.
Any more check questions? Okay, how about our big spreadsheet?
Okay. Let's see. The first item I wanted to bring up on the big spreadsheet of expenses that has all the line items is that you'll notice the subtotal of personnel services shows that we have spent 34%, which we have to watch carefully because we are 1/3 of the way through the year because this reflects everything through the end of October. So if all was divided exactly equally, we should be at 33%. But checking the actual number of pay periods, there have been 9 pay periods that are finished and 17 coming up. So I did the double check math, and the amount of money we've been spending on average per pay period, we will have more than that by about $500 per pay period for the next 19 pay periods, or 17 pay periods, for a total of 26. So that looks really good to me. It looks like we're actually in really, really good shape. The next month where we will have 3 pay periods that fall in 1 month is the month of January. So we'll see another big month then. The other item I wanted to mention for sure, you'll see in the October column, kind of towards the top there, there's a $1,300 that's marked in kind of a peachy orange color. The reason I marked that is because we moved that down. It actually should have come out of the line that is training, travel, and conference. And then, let's see, Denny, did that 1755 then? That went...
1755 went way down here.
Okay, that 1755 was actually in miscellaneous contracts. That was the cataloging number from the checks list. So we just had a couple things just get in the wrong spot here. So $1,300 represented a portion of our Iowa Library Association conference registrations, because we were basically registering all the staff, 8 of us, for 1, 2, or 3 days, depending on how long everybody was going. So if you see, I had a sheet here where I had actually run it through, and we were still in good shape as far as money remaining in those lines. Another small adjustment that I think was reflected last time as well is that down lower on the first page there's the fuel line item, 6331, and that one I had to put a few $100s in because every time we drive a city vehicle, or if we can't do that, we would reimburse somebody for their mileage for a long trip like that. That actually, we count that the same as our travel and conference. So I just adjusted the travel and conference budget to make that equal with the fuel. So it's all together.
So if I can say that back, Sarah, line 6230, that's training separate. That was the way we used to do it.
Yeah,
And after the 2017-18 first column falls off, then 6240 is where training, travel, and conference has all been aggregated since then, right?
Yeah, I think the 6230 line training technically still exists as a line item, but over the years, we've realized that any trainings that we sign staff up for, they're usually free. The ones that we can do a webinar, or they're provided by the state library. So we very rarely have any costs that really belong in that line. The travel and conference is where most of our money goes. And those 2 lines we have traditionally tied together. It's all for continuing education for staff.
Okay. And then that 1,300 in the pinky color should actually be down in 6240.
Yes.
And the 1755-56 belongs further down.
Yeah.
The grand total is still correct.
Yes.
There's just realignment. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Another change on this spreadsheet from what you've seen last month, in the amended column there for 1819, you can see there's 2 numbers that are highlighted in kind of a brown color, and we had money budgeted for our internet service provider down under miscellaneous contracts, $64.99, and that was a combination. It was a total of $13,200, which would cover all of our bills with the Iowa Communications Network, and then also our Waverly Utilities internet bills, because we're doing all of our wireless service through Waverly Utilities just to get a different network and kind of free up some traffic space there. But the way the finance department likes to see it now is having all of those ISP internet service provider charges go through the telecommunications line, which is 6373. So it's a net difference of 0, but just so that it doesn't appear that we're in any big trouble in the telecommunications line. You can see that basically we're utilizing the money from miscellaneous contracts. I did notice that we are at about, I think somewhere I had calculated, oh no, it's in the far right column there under books, line 6520, that we have spent 46% of our book budget money, and we're 33% through the year. So we have talked about the fact that we are always ahead on book budget money. We spend it to make sure that we don't have to scramble too much at the end. And we usually spend additional funds on books at the end of the year. But I have talked to the book orderers and said, I will just keep an eye on it as we go into the first of the year here and make sure we don't get too far ahead before we reach spring. The last thing we want to do is have a stop on book buying too far before the end of June. So, but I don't think we're in any real trouble there.
How about that media block?
Yeah, let me talk about the media block. So the reason, well, that's interesting. I'm looking at the orange highlighted ones in the amended column. So the media budget, just for the sake, again, of showing where we stand in the overall services and commodities budget, I have shown as being amended to $30,200, down from just under $38,000. And the reason I did that is because we'd been talking about where our consultant money was going to come from, and I don't know that we made a hard decision on that when we decided it at the last meeting, but our consultant line, we knew our planning consultants the contract was going to cost $17,200, and that we had $9,450 budgeted. So one of the options that we talked about as possibly being the best option was to use reserve money that was state library funding for that. And that money always comes out of that portion of the budget that's below the green line on the second page. And I can't switch back and forth between those. That reserve money always has to stay separate. So what I'm thinking is obviously we go ahead and pay our consultant, and then the state money, which has arrived, by the way, those numbers are solid numbers now. On the second page, under the rows are library, open access, and direct state aid. It's under the miscellaneous line for restricted. That are two checks that we received from the state library, which we've received them both now, 6766 and 3837, for a total of $10,603 that we received from the state this year. And there are no restrictions on how that money is spent. We report on the direct state aid portion of it every year, but it's basically anything for the benefit of the library. So if we do end up showing the budget this way, where the extra consultant fees, which were $7,700, something like that, came from media, then we could spend a good chunk, the $7,700 from the state library money on media then, so it's a pass-through, basically. Does that make sense? I know it sounds kind of confusing. And for the purposes of budgeting, usually towards the end of the year, I will show these line items so that you can compare them against the original budgeted amount, so that you can see where we maybe need to adjust, for the following year. But for now, this is just a tool to show us that we're still within budget. This is how we're still within budget. And that state library money, that's one reason why we don't really budget strictly for that money ahead of time, because depending on what things come up during the year, that's a help to us, either in purchasing additional materials or buying some equipment that we really didn't know that we needed until, into the year, things that haven't been budgeted.
Okay, any more questions on the overall budget? How about revenues?
Let's see. Denny, maybe you can help me on this one.
Well, she was talking about receiving money. We got the county contract money during the month of October at $32,359. And let's see, October, the fines money was $664, which was slightly up from September. And the duplicating money was $414, which was slightly up from September's, which was $366. And so the total revenue was the total revenue was $33,437.
Okay, any more questions on financials, everybody? Do I hear?
That we approve the financials as a first standing resolution.
And do I hear a second?
I second.
Any more discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, let's move on to the report on our strategic planning.
Well, an email came today from Rob Cullen, one of our consultants for the planning process, and I emailed that out right away to everyone. But in case you haven't seen it, it's just kind of an update of where we're at now that our planning retreat happened, and that was at the very beginning of November. For those listening to our meeting, we met at the fire station. There were about half a dozen board members, half a dozen staff members, plus one very honorable citizen who joined us. And we just talked about, ideas that came out of the focus groups that we had with the public, that the consultants held, also the online survey results and some of the things that came from that. And we're just kind of looking for the top ideas, and we did a few exercises to kind of get to what were those ideas that most people were thinking, looked like natural next steps. So a few of the ideas that came up, not to say that these will be the chosen ones going forward, but ones that at least got the most votes in our retreat setting were, to look again, reevaluate our hours open to the public, do some rethinking about late fines on materials, which we have kind of already started that process. Maybe increase collaborations with Wartburg and really utilize their expertise for different areas like teaching technology and providing programs for adults and things like that. Work to rethink and or expand space for teens and tweens, the not quite teens yet. There was a lot of discussion at the retreat about space, just different spaces that we need and how we could do that. Developing a quiet space for users who would prefer that, especially during busy times. The idea that the building planning could be put to full use by enclosing a patio was an option that was put out there. Adding a self-check station came up as an important thing in the focus groups and in the surveys, but as an option for people who want to go in and out without having too many conversations, and the folks who like that can still go through. So that's something for us to look at. Evaluating staffing organization and expanding digital collections. Those were some of the top vote getters in the retreat. So we also talked about our mission statement, which we'll be working to finalize that a little bit more as we finish up the overarching goals. So next, what's coming next is that in the next 2 weeks, The consultants will be completing the draft of our high-level plan, which will be kind of the big goals for the next year. And then they'll be reviewing it with us. They'll be helping us deploy some kind of an input process where the public can help guide us on what our mission statement should be. We'll take input there. Then the board will officially review the finalized high-level plan. The consultants will be on site for that, and that will be sometime December or January board meeting. And then at that same on-site visit, the consultants will be meeting with staff to kind of get us going on developing the specifics of the activities that we are going to do to get to these goals over the next year. So I think that part of the plan, we specifically asked for their assistance in that, because that's the tricky part where we get into measurables and writing realistic goals, I think, that can be reached within the year. So others can chime in here too, but I feel like the retreat was an energizing event that I felt good about coming away, that we'd had a good conversation, a lot of good ideas. So I'm anxious to see their report and what they kind of lift out as what our priorities could be for the next year. And did anybody else have any comments about the retreat day?
Well, I thought they were very well organized, and the day moved fast. I was dreading 6 hours, and it actually went much faster, and there wasn't wasted time, and everyone had a chance to say something and speak out. So I think it was well done. I've been through a number of long-range plans over the years, and this group seems to be the most focused themselves and on task than we've had.
I thought it was nice to kind of look around the room and see many different people, whether they were the employees or the board members or anybody else that was there, and it was just nice to kind of see their perspective and kind of see their ideas. And if you just kind of sat down and looked at the whole room, you saw all those sticky notes with all those ideas, and each one of them valid, and each one of them that could be implemented. So I thought that was really cool.
And there wasn't anyone there that wasn't involved and looking ahead and planning. So I think it was great.
I thought too, the input, the engagement from everybody was great as well. And, they were demonstrating their expertise in this area, which is why we hired them, and responding with information about how we benchmark against similar libraries, or giving some insights into some of that too, which was really helpful.
Yep.
Let's move on to item number 6 then. And while we're at it, underneath 6 is that we've got 2 subsections here. Let's do the discussion of library fines and fine-free libraries, since that was brought up in our previous item here. And my thought on it was, let's have our final discussion here and then get ready to vote. But James had also a good point, so say what you told me.
Well, I thought it was a good idea to, put something on the calendar, but we had also asked those experts to give their advice on fine-free libraries, and we haven't really had a chance to hear what they had to say. We had that discussion during that strategic planning meeting, but they were just they didn't put too much input into it. So, we have talked about it, but at the end of the day, I think it'd be nice to kind of hear what they had to say before we did that final vote. Mm-hmm. So
It seemed to me that we were more into it and interested in it than they were, or that they realized that we were. And so maybe they will come back with something that will help us make a decision.
Yeah, it was somewhat subjective in that conversation, the comments they had made. The notes I made were, we talked some about the value of a fine-free library and what the pros of that are. And they talked about, just the goodwill that you develop, with your patrons. And they also talked about, providing an opportunity for those who want to, not related to the fines, but some feel compelled to make a gift, in that case, and that in some cases, turns out to be a better way to approach it. I wrote down one quote that I thought was really interesting. She said, "The terror in children caused by fines is disproportionate to the fine amount." But that idea, and I've seen that, and I think there's those of us on staff too who can remember that, just that feeling that you have as a child in the library, you're not really in control of when your things get back most of the time, and you usually don't have the change on you, the money on you to pay the fines. And so it's kind of it's one of those things that sticks in your head related to the library, that maybe we don't want that to be an association anymore. They also made the comment, which would be interesting to see in data form, that the typical overdues tend to be 1, 2, or 3 days, and we've talked a lot about whether the fine on an overdue fine on an item is actually an incentive to return it on time. Because if this was implemented where we had no overdue fines, the patron would still have a due date that would be the same, and they would still receive notices from our system that would say, "Hey, your item is due in 3 days. Would you like to renew? And your item is due on X date," or your item is 1 week overdue. So they would still receive those. And at the point that, if it got to the point, the few that get to the point that don't come back, and at 60 days past the last due date, that's when it would get billed to their account as a lost item. And
That we
so
would
that
still
process
keep.
would all still be the same.
So we still would have a lot of bookkeeping to do.
Well,
I remember one argument for fine-free was it frees staff to not have to do the bookkeeping.
well, that bookkeeping though is actually done by the system, by our computer system. What it frees staff from doing is when a patron comes up to check something out, saying, I see here that you owe 40 cents from 2 weeks ago, and then collecting that 40 cents. It's usually not a big deal, but that's a common interaction between staff and patrons throughout the day. And you think about other ways that staff time could be used as well. So
It seems to me from listening to our staff that the experiences and the anecdotal evidence they have themselves from dealing with fines leads them to believe we shouldn't have fines, that we would have better patron relations if we didn't.
yeah, there are definitely several on staff who feel that way. And I tend to be with them on that.
And I think we all are having an opinion. But if we want to use our consultant wisely, then should we say that we will hear what they have to say in December, and then we'll take our vote when we get that?
Because there are a number of parameters. It was kind of interesting to go online and look up libraries that are fine-free. And I made a quick list of some of the other considerations, like, do you eliminate fines on all items, children and adult, and non-traditional items like the cake pans and video materials? What about fines for interlibrary loans? Replacement charges for lost items remain, and so there's that issue. And what about people that already paid their fine? If we go fine-free and they say, "Hey, I'd like a refund," and
Whoever might did,
when
but
we
no.
block library cards for long overdues. So when we do get to that point of voting, if it is a yes, we still have some other things to think about.
I think it's important to know too, I mean, when you actually broke it down by the actual fine itself, we only actually take in about $3,500 to $4,000 a year in fines, and really that is very minimal. As far as keeping everything else intact, as far as like the replacement costs or lost and stolen items, that kind of thing, I mean, I think that would remain relatively unchanged. So I think that's kind of really what we're looking at is it really, I mean, clearly it's not a moneymaker for us, so,
It's
can we
way
use
less
that?
than 1% of the budget.
Exactly. So,
And you don't want to dismiss that, but like you
Yeah.
said,
Right.
when you really see the number for that, the work, the interaction, the effect on the patron relationship, and the reduction in access to materials particularly for children that may not be able to control some of
Right.
that activity anyway, it does make you, it's definitely worthy of consideration.
and correct me if I'm wrong, when we were looking at that number, that was for all materials. That was for movies, that was for children's,
Yeah,
adult
yeah.
books, I mean, all of it. So it's really, even if we were to break it down, I mean, I don't even know if it would be
Smaller
worth it.
amount, right.
We,
And I don't know if it would be worth it to spend all that time to, look at assessing fines for just movies, because that would have to change how we kind of look at things and the system and all that kind of thing. So it might be even more of a headache than just take away the fine in
Yeah.
the first place.
It's interesting now that Personnel and Policies has discussed it and Budget and Finance has discussed it, because there have been some of the same issues talked about and some new ones that have come up. I do see some complications with doing some item types and not others. I don't know if it came up at the retreat, but if we were to do fine-free on just children's items, that doesn't mean that a child would never have a fine, because they may check something out that wouldn't be within that children's materials category, or vice versa. An adult could have something and they wouldn't get fined on that either, which is fine. But I'm looking at our revenue sheet that we looked at a few minutes ago, and so for fines and book charges, we had budgeted this year that we would receive somewhere around $9,000, and that would be for overdue fines and all the charges related to lost items, so paying for lost items and the administrative fee that goes along with that. And somehow, I don't have all that paperwork that I brought to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, but somehow, yes, I looked at that and said it was roughly half and half, that about half of it was from long overdue and lost items, lost and damaged, and the other half was from overdue. So that's kind of where we're getting to that, $3,500, $4,000 number.
Did the consultants, I know they didn't advise, either way, but did they say anything about other libraries that they've worked with who have gone fine-free, or any other libraries our size? Or did they make any comments about how it is a small portion of our budget?
They really didn't, did they?
No, that was kind of what we were hoping, that they would kind of guide us a little bit. And they didn't.
I mean, I got the sense, just like you were saying, Diana, that they may not have come into that discussion knowing we'd already
Yeah.
kind of thought this through and were ready to get deeper into it, because they were sort of bringing it up as something other libraries should have done and you might want to consider, and we were already going, we have considered, and we're maybe ready for a little deeper discussion. So I think the idea of having them address that more specifically is a good one.
Do we see them saying anything that's going to sway, from our discussions before, it sounds like most of us are pretty on board with going fine-free. Do we see them saying anything that's going to sway us from going, oh, well, we probably should keep the fines in place?
Well, I'm wondering, I realize this time right now with the long-range plan and all the stuff we're working with, budget and finance, it's about the busiest time we could possibly be in, but is there any way you could just check with a few libraries?
Oh, yeah.
Similar, and just see what they have to say? I
Yeah,
got
they
the
were-
impression from our consultant, back at that noonish meeting we had back in, at the end of September, that they really didn't have much of an opinion at all. I think I'm the one that asked the question that we were talking about it, and it was all, oh, well, yeah. And so I think I did say that we were interested in that, and so at our retreat, they did help to lead the discussion a little bit, but they weren't ready to dive in themselves on any information, and I think we said we wanted them to dive in.
Well, and at the retreat, I think, we were really pressed for time to get to other issues, and I think that issue kind of came up. We had a lot of lively discussion amongst ourselves, I think, but yeah, I wished we could have had them a couple more hours so
Right.
we could talk about it more. Ellie Dawson, one of the consultants that came this time, had been a library director for 30 years in New York State, I think. And I don't know if she was talking about her own library or a neighboring library, but I remember her saying that they had gone fine-free and they had worried a lot about, well, how much revenue will we lose? And that was the example where she had said it turned out that the money that they received in gifts following that far exceeded what they had received before, and it was just a really interesting turn that you never could have really expected. So that's the one example I remember her giving. They didn't give any negative examples. But yeah, I didn't feel like the conversation was complete. I mean, we were kind of forced by time to move on.
Yep.
But I can ask them if, my understanding too is that they were going to provide some kind of document, some kind of compilation of what they had gathered from other clients. So I'll ask them again for that.
Well, if we have a free will offering or a guilt-free bucket, I know I can
Assuage your guilt.
assuage a lot of guilt by throwing 30 cents into that bucket and then feel totally at ease.
Well, that's interesting because it's been years ago now, but I had a conversation with a librarian at the Waterloo Public Library, and this was in regard to paying for copies, because that's another thing that staff gets involved with, people paying a dime a page for copies. And at least at this moment in time, and I don't know if it's still this way, but they decided at their library just to put out a bucket, a drop box, if you will, and it's kind of like a free will offering for copies, and that more than paid for, the paper and toner. I mean, people were generous, in what they paid for it. So that same concept could end up working out for that as well.
Just a quick question, quick point of curiosity, actually, and it may not really relate to going fine-free, but do you lose the incentive that a person would need to return a book? I'm thinking specifically when you've got a popular book and people are on a list waiting and somebody has got it. I've heard patrons complain, well, I have to wait too long and I want the book and they don't bring it back. Is there a mechanism to get people to bring their books back on time? Is that something you think about?
I think what at least one study that we read showed that it wasn't an incentive. It was questioning whether the fines that we charge are really that strong of an incentive for people to return things. Usually on the most popular items, we're buying multiple copies anyway, and so hopefully if we've got one person that tends that direction, we've got another that reads it in half the time it was due and returns it early. So I don't know if we'll end up buying a few more extra copies of things.
And I suppose you could always just send out a hitman and that would do it.
Yeah, there's that too.
But yeah, just like you said, some of those studies show that it's more of the reminders and things that are creating the actual incentive, more so than if I don't do this, I'll get a 30-cent fine or whatever.
Yeah, if you're getting an email every day, you might want to bring that back instead of seeing that pop up on your phone all the time. So,
Well, and see,
That's worse than a fine.
Kind of going back to what Andrew said, I mean, if we get back and we get in front of these experts and they say, a lot of these libraries have had issues with people returning it on time, and then there's a hold list, and then, there's a whole line of patrons that are more upset with that fact, then that's kind of something that would, I would look or weigh heavily on, but that's kind of my thought mentality.
Okay, we all know what we think at this point. Let's see what the consultants think, and then finish this discussion, because I don't think we've talked it to death, but it may be starved for oxygen. It's time to make a decision so staff can get on with what's going on here. So should we move on here then to just a quick discussion on our budget and finance meeting, our first meeting on the budget request?
Sure. So basically what I provided you tonight with was a list of some of the bigger items that we're thinking about, or some newer items that possibly need to be considered as we plan for the 19-20 budget. So this would be the budget starting July of 19. And actually the budget spreadsheet doesn't tell you a whole lot yet because we don't know much about wages. I do know that I don't think the personnel budget is going to change all that much. We're at a pretty steady place as far as where people are at on step and grade. And I don't know yet if there will be a cost of living adjustment or not. I did put in kind of a healthy amount for anticipating increases in health insurance, again, because that's been the pattern the last few years, and hopefully I'm wrong about that. But I did show the possibility that our income would be reduced by the 4,000. I guess I had written in 45 here. If we do make that decision to go, that number can be easily switched back if we decide not to. The big difference if you look under services and commodities, it looks as if, so I'm looking at the top of the second page of the budget spreadsheet now for 1920. It looks as if we went down in budget, which as we comb through it, I'm not sure if it'll stay that way or not when we add in, additional items. But I think the big thing there is we had that consultant fee this year on the consulting line, which was a big number, and that won't be there, although we talked for a while about maybe putting in a number there. I'm supposed to be verifying what that number would be, but if we do follow-up work to their space study that they've been giving us some information on, would there be a cost to that if we chose to go forward, and should we write that into the budget now? Obviously, it wouldn't be as extensive of a study as this, so I'm guessing it would be lower, but so anyway, that makes the services and commodities section lower. I really didn't change anything in the reserve amount. I'm hoping that our state money will still be there next year. I say that every year, and so far it's still been there, but yeah, so, there's not, the best thing probably at this point to look at is the text of our list of things that we're kind of considering. And I did add to the top kind of a timeline that we had hammered out last year, the previous year, on thinking about upcoming things that may need replacement. All of these systems are 20 years old now. Our boiler, the HVAC system, although we invested quite a bit in that in the last few years, so that should take us longer. But just to get these things kind of on the radar, to remind as I'm talking with other department heads and the city, to get it on their radar that it'll be within the next couple of years that we're going to need a boiler, we think, and to kind of start to gauge which of these can we afford to wait until they fail, or which of these do we have to replace preemptively so that we are not in a bad position. So those kind of out there a few years.
When's our next Budget and Finance meeting?
It's the Monday after Thanksgiving weekend,
26th,
I think.
So, and just a reminder, it's Deanna and Michael and I, we're on the,
James.
or James, pardon, James, we're on the, I know Michael Perry. We're on the Budget and Finance, but anyone is invited to come, so that when we bring the budget to the full board in December, anyone that wants to be involved in the line items and the nitty-picky stuff can be, and the December discussion will be just a reaffirmation. We will not be going line item by line item down that budget, because it will have to be turned into the city shortly after the December board meeting. And so feel free to come to that next one. And we usually can stay on task well for an hour.
And like you were saying, just to reiterate, even though some of these future, larger potential replacements after the typical lifespan of key items aren't geared up for next year, keeping those always in front of us during this planning process, I think, is good, and making sure everybody's aware that those things, we're aware of them and thinking about that.
Okay, are we ready to move on to personnel and policies? And Elaine, you're the person here.
Yes.
Who else is on personnel? Okay, you guys want to?
I missed the last meeting though, so.
And Jim Jansen. But we're excited to bring this first policy, Young Patron Safety Policy Revisions. You've got a copy that has no heading. It says the Board of Trustees and staff of the library are concerned for the safety and welfare of children who use the library unattended by an appropriate supervisor. An appropriate supervisor is a parent, guardian, or responsible person who's 12 years of age or older who is supervising the child. And so if you look at the page under this page, that's what we started with. And the problems that we were dealing with were that as you work through this, children left unattended when the doors are closing, children left unattended that are below the age of 5 while the library is open. There were a number of different terms used, like parent and guardian and responsible adult. And if you look through different sections, different ones of those terms were used. And we kept thinking, if there ever is a problem that goes to court and we have to use this document as our policy and say this is why we did what we did, it's going to be awfully hard to figure out which of those terms we were thinking and which apply. And staff needs something they can look at quickly and decide, okay, this is what we're supposed to do. So what we did was use, in that first paragraph, an appropriate supervisor as a term that means a parent, guardian, or a responsible person who's 12 years of age or older who's supervising the child. And then as you look through, that term supervisor or the term parents and guardians is used consistently this time throughout. So with parent and guardian, as one of the statements says, the parent or guardian is the person that's in charge, is responsible for the child's behavior. So parents and guardians are important. But it could be that the parent would say, I want the older brother who's 13 to pick up the child, and that's where we get to appropriate supervisor. So that is in here at different places too.
And that language was suggested by the city attorney who we ran the policy by.
So Personnel and Policies moves that this document be adopted in place of the one on the second page.
Okay, that does not need a second since it comes from committee. Is there any discussion from anyone here?
Just reinforcing, other than that consistency of terms and that clarification, no other
No other
content
major
changes were made.
Right. But Yeah, that consistency. And that was hard to figure out because we know we have people using the library that don't have a parent nearby, but they might have a guardian.
No, I think this was a great solution to that challenge.
Okay, good.
Elaine, is there a reason when the library is closed, it only talks about parent or guardians being located and not a supervised
No, because
supervisor?
we felt at that point that it's the parent or guardian that's responsible. And we didn't want to put staff in the position of trying to decide who the supervisor might be for that child.
In that setting, you're saying it does take a little bit more of a legal definition of finding the person who is truly responsible.
That can remove the child from the premises, actually, I mean,
Yeah, well, and that's a case where, it was kind of, I guess the example that was talked about would we call their friend's parent and ask if we can't get a hold of a parent or guardian, then we'll ask the police officer to drive by and they usually would try to work out a plan with the child about if it's happened more than once, kind of a backup plan for them to get home if they don't have anyone available at that time to get them there. But I think usually the first time they'll get a ride home, but just somebody to talk to about it.
Because it puts staff in an awkward position. If there's, for instance, a broken home, do you call, how do you handle it? Something like that. If the child is standing outside the door and the library's closing and it's snowing and whatever, that's tough.
So Elaine, in your bottom section, the first bullet, 2 staff members will be with a child. Is there a reason for 2 instead of 1?
Yeah, back when Pastor Mark Anderson was on the board and he was on the Personnel and Policies Committee, he was at the time helping a lot of churches write policies for their youth groups and things like that. And he said that it's just the best way to assure that there's another person in the room, another adult in the room, so if accusations were made or things like that.
That makes sense.
A best practice.
Yeah.
okay, we have a motion. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, that passes. Thank you very much. And let's move on to discussing our Thanksgiving holiday library out.
This is in that same state, for mine, it was the same staple thing. The city's new policy is the first page that on the bottom says page 39 of 60. And the library's policy is the second page, which has a 44-page number at the bottom. And it looks like the same thing, but when you look more closely, it's a little different. The city's policy is that Friday after Thanksgiving, everything is closed. If you look at the second page, Friday after Thanksgiving, library is open. So we had this just hard discussion about how many people are using their day off, the day after Thanksgiving, to come to the library, and will that cause problems? And then from the staff's point of view, if they're city employees, which they are, and other city employees are off that day, what do we do? So the holiday schedule on page 44, the old one, it's interesting to note how the library compensated for that on the next page in blue print. So the city has 9 paid holidays and 3 paid floating holidays. And so that totals 96 hours. The library had 8 paid holidays, but 4 paid floating holidays, and that equaled 96. So in a sense, the hours were the same, but it meant that some staff had to work the day after Thanksgiving. So, I don't know, Sarah, I'd sort of like to throw this to you then to summarize.
Sure. I mean, I
how we
think,
got to this point. The
yeah.
staff, yeah.
Part of this is brought to you in the spirit of, the city has just done a major revision of their employee handbook, which in lots of conversations with our new HR person and our city administrator, I've explained that the difference in the library policy being different all these years has always been a chain of command issue, because the library board is ultimately responsible for the library and its operation rather than the city council. That was the major reason that there always was a separate policy. As far as the benefits go, our intent was always to have, the same benefits, not additional. And so, but we had a way worked out to make that possible. But I think as we've been trying to meld together all the union policies and just policies from different departments into one employee handbook, I think this is a good step to. It's been difficult all these years to explain why we're taking our holidays on different days, and I think it's worth entertaining the idea. If they're just identical, then it solves a lot of. There's just some consistency in that. It solves a lot of difference issues that maybe don't need to exist. The thing about Easter is another thing we can talk about later.
Easter is the other one that's got slight differences, yeah.
Yeah. And actually, what is the proposal? I guess the proposal is just Thanksgiving.
Try Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And
the day after Thanksgiving as a holiday for library staff.
PNP talked about doing this as kind of a trial thing to see how it goes. The one thing to note about Thanksgiving is that if the library were to be closed both Thanksgiving Day and the day after, we're still open Saturday and Sunday of that weekend following. So I don't know if that makes it better for anyone. We do receive a lot of phone calls on days like that asking if we're open, as if people expect maybe we're not. So I don't know
Did we have a quick check on what we thought our traffic had been on the Friday after
We had done that before, and I'm trying to remember.
It was lower.
It was lower.
It was lower.
And then we got to the question of how low is so low that we wouldn't be open, and we didn't really have an answer to that. But yeah, it was lower.
So the library is definitely there to serve the patrons, and what does that? And then another thing that's different is the library is open Sundays during the winter, and city offices are not. So.
Right.
This year, because the full-time staff wouldn't have known this was coming. I mean, I think many of them would have taken a paid leave day for that day anyway. That's a common scheduling thing that, we work out. If someone isn't traveling very far, they might offer to stay that day or whatever. But it would not count as a holiday for full-time people this year. If we closed, the full-time staff would find another paid leave day to take this year. If it became policy in future years, well, and I think we may have to talk about this again at the December meeting, because I think we were hoping we would change it to be the same holidays, and I probably wrote the agenda wrong then. We were hoping we could try out these holidays that the city has this year, so that January 1st is when the new floating holidays are given. So it will need to be able to say to HR whether the library employees are getting 3 or 4. So I'll just go ahead and explain how Easter would work then. Normally, since we are normally open on Sundays at that time of year, the full-time folks would either take usually supposed to take the Monday following, but if all 4 of us couldn't do that and keep the library open, somebody would take their holiday on Friday. So we had to offer some flexibility there anyway. But the way the city holidays fall is that we would have Good Friday off, like all the city offices, and then we would be open Saturday, and then closed on Easter Sunday, and then, of course, open on the Monday following. So as far as, that would be the change there. It would be another Friday closed. It would be the Friday of Easter weekend closed.
Gave us a new appreciation for the complexities of being a library director.
And keeping everyone happy.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
That's definitely the goal.
Are we ready to
So-
make a decision here?
Yeah, I mean, the Easter discussion is not part of this recommendation.
No.
Well, that's what
Or this.
I suppose we can't, and maybe we're not ready to change the motion right now, but we may have to discuss it again in December then to decide about the rest of the year if we want to get those floating holidays done right in January. So I don't know what the right thing would be to do, to vote to make all the holidays the same or not, or just focus on Thanksgiving right now.
I think we're ready to decide on Thanksgiving, and we certainly could then come back with a solid proposal in December.
Okay.
So real quick, I mean, to kind of have an objective point of view, I mean, what would you lean towards, Sarah? Do you feel like it's worth staying open, or do you feel like you just don't see enough people to make it?
For many years I thought, and I think the original viewpoint was, and there's truth to this, that we need to be open on some days when the other offices are closed. Actually being open Saturday and Sunday is an example of that. But I think after looking at the traffic numbers, and that's been a while ago now since I looked, I think it was maybe last year at this time when we looked at the numbers, they were considerably lower, and to the point that it's so slow that you've got staff wondering why they need to be there that day. And I don't want to make it sound like we've got great staff members and they're there, and we've done a really good job over the years, I think, of switching out with people who are taking a longer trip that year and making it possible for people to be where they are or where they need to be with their families. I think at this point I am leaning toward just keeping the same holiday schedule as the city, and partly because the traffic that we see, and granted, students aren't our entire population, but when school is out, we don't see that same rush of student population there. It's quieter from that perspective. And like I said, from all the calls we get, we kind of get the feeling that people are pleasantly surprised if we are open, because they kind of called thinking, oh, I bet they're not open today. So I really feel like we probably wouldn't, and I would be open to hearing from the public, what they would think. But I don't know that there would be too many people that would be very bothered by that. And I think also about, like our tradition the past several years has been to close on one day of October, just in the middle of the week for ILA. Granted, that's not a holiday weekend, but we don't hear, people are pretty understanding about that. So at this point in time, I am leaning toward just making it the same. And then I think the reason the Personnel and Policies Committee said, well, let's make it a trial, is that if we get to the end of 2019 and we feel like maybe that wasn't a good decision, we could always go back to the way it was and switch it back.
We aren't going to know till we try it.
And I guess that was going to be my follow-up question, is if we adopt it, then at what point do we
Evaluate.
evaluate? Does it resurface, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say like this time next year or after Thanksgiving next year in 2019, we'd have a pretty good feel for how did the Easter holiday go. did we hear much feedback from people? And Thanksgiving, again, we would have 2 Thanksgivings under our belt at that point.
And I guess lastly, so they would just use the floating holiday for if we decide to close, and so then that way essentially the hours stay the same.
Yeah, the total number of holiday hours will remain the same no matter, and that's kind of why we have to do it for a whole year.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we would have the same number starting in 2019 that everybody else in the city has, which is 9 holidays and 3 floating holidays.
Okay.
Do I hear a motion then?
Yeah, how does that turn into a motion based on the discussion?
So I think we are just, my understanding is you wanted to stay with just Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
So I move that we approve the library hours to be like the cities over the Thanksgiving holiday, which means Friday we would close.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any more discussion?
Do we need to clarify that that holiday is coming from one of the floating holidays, or
In the motion?
yeah?
Oh, we could, that although that will be closed as a holiday for the library, this year, it will not be counted as a holiday for full-time salaried people. Yeah. Or it won't be holiday pay. It'll be another kind of leave. Maybe we can incorporate that. We can incorporate that into, I know what you're saying,
That's
though.
really hard to say that.
And I have had
Understanding
that,
the schedule of the calendar year and what they may have taken as their floating days to date and.
so that nobody misunderstands that they're going to get a holiday that day. And I have already had that conversation that if this happens, that a different kind of leave would have to be used on that day for this holiday until we start 2019, if that's the way it goes.
Well, we could just essentially close those days, right? Just
Yep.
essentially just say, you know what, it's not a holiday, we're just closed. So you can use a floating holiday if you'd like, but
Yeah, what they end up using as I guess we're talking more about in this case, it would be more about the closure of the library than the actual benefit of the holiday pay.
so I think we could just essentially say that we're just going to close on the Friday after
Friday
rather
after
than
Thanksgiving.
worry about holiday or adapt
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah.
Good point. Yep.
And I guess the reason I said not to discuss the Easter one, because it's not on the agenda.
Yeah.
It was not published, and
Yeah.
we need to publish that so
That's
anyone
right.
can make comment.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor of being closed on the Friday after Thanksgiving? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you, everybody. And I know on this next item on the agenda, the item 8, the reaccreditation review, it's just not going to be a discussion item tonight because there has been too much going on to give us a good discussion on that. So we're going to move on past item number 8 and the continuing education item. That's just, Sarah is always keeping an eye out for opportunities for trustee continuing education because as part of the reaccreditation process, each trustee is supposed to have 3 hours of continuing ed a year, so we need to find some of those opportunities. And right now, you have nothing on the horizon that you know of?
Usually this is the time of year when things slow down a little bit as far as, it probably won't be until after the first of the year that there's much offered.
Okay, and so let's move on to item 10. As far as the Iowa Library Association reports from staff, you had those in your packet.
fun
and could go through there. They were most interesting,
Yes.
just really
Good
interesting there.
ideas.
And so read through those, and I'm
So
sure that,
diverse in terms of the workshops they attended and,
Mm-hmm.
just the kind of topics covered.
it was just great.
And I'm relieved to know that the library is going to remain bed bug free.
Yes.
Yes, that's our goal.
And then our annual survey, that was attached onto our packet also, and I found that most interesting. So if you want to review that yourself, the columns there, the column on the right is last year, the column on the left closest to the item being described, that is this current year, and gives us a good idea of where we stand. I think it was just amazingly accurate on what we also were beginning to find out from our long-range plan survey. Got anything else to add to that?
I don't believe so.
Okay, and we're looking ahead. On Monday, the 28th of January, the Bremer County Library Association will meet with the County Board of Supervisors, and I believe that's Andrew as our representative, and then usually
Yes.
you go and then another trustee. They're almost guaranteed to be a blizzard.
Yeah.
That day there usually is.
I've been
But
there in the
anyone's
blizzard.
welcome to go, but it does tend to take place there right during business hours, so those that could go and want to, fine. Those that are working, we'll understand about that. And there doesn't need to be a lot of people there.
Where is it at this year?
In the courthouse. It'll be in the courthouse in the supervisor's room.
Okay.
And all the librarians and their trustee meet with the supervisors and present that, the budget request that we came up with at the County Library Association meeting. Okay, if you'll look down at the bottom, our next meeting is on Tuesday, the 11th of December, and we will be back in the library conference room. So any more comments from anybody?
I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned Emily McClyman, our teen librarian, tonight. She's actually down at the ceremony at Hawkeye Community College, I think is where they were holding it. The 20 under 40 folks were being recognized tonight, and she is one of them, the Courier's 20 under 40, so we're very proud of her.
We are proud of her.
Just super.
She brings a lot to the
Yes.
library and makes that the teen program we have one of the most active in the state. I think.
Absolutely.
I know the library is loud, but I'd rather have loud teenagers in the library than loud teenagers walking the streets.
I'd rather have a loud library than crickets.
Yeah.
That's right, exactly. Okay, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, we're done.